What's the trick in making my love stick? What's the trick? As I'm learning to get used to when my music fades out and when I come in, welcome back to the Commercialisation of Sports series with me, Anthony Morrissey, the CEO and founder of AMSC, or AM Sports Consulting. It's been a big week for me. Finally getting my website up and running where you can find all these amazing podcasts and commercialization series. I keep on saying podcasts, but I probably should say vlogs. Also, as well, I'm delighted that I've got another couple of customers getting involved with AM Sports Consulting, a club. I can't announce yet because I haven't actually signed a contract, but a club in Ireland, and then there's also an app in Sweden that I'm helping out too. So delighted to be able to include them in my portfolio. But go on to my website, amsc.se, and you'll see a little bit more. Today, you come on the show and listen to me talking and blabbering on. Instead, I'm going to introduce my guest, who I am honoured to have on my vlog. I've known Maeve for quite a long time, going back to histories working for Munster Rugby together, and I've always been amazed by her ability to really interact with what she wants to do and what her clients wants, and then her just knowledge of the sporting industry is second to none. She's now helping bring the best sports tech from Australia and New Zealand into Europe, and wait till you hear about it, because anyone that's got a daughter or a son or anyone wants to learn a little bit more, this is a conversation you want to go to stick in with. But for now, I'll just introduce her. Maeve, Moriarty, how are you doing?
I'm very well, Anthony. That was some intro. And congratulations on the business. It sounds like you're flying it.
I'm doing my best. It's good. It's brilliant. I'm delighted to be involved with stuff. And look, I've taken years of experience. You saw me when I had a little bit more hair than I have now back in the day at Munster. And now I'm trying to take those experiences and bring them to as many close federation of brands as possible. But here, everyone's heard me talk that stuff. I want to talk about you. Okay. Give me an example of Maeve Moriarty's sporting love, or when you go right back when you can remember the most. What is it about sport that kind of attracted you when you were younger?
Well, it's interesting because I was thinking about this over the weekend when I was going to talk to you this morning. And I was thinking, I've never played sport. I've typical, I think, of probably most girls. I avoided the whole thing. I just thought, I don't want to be out there front and center. But actually, when I started thinking about it, I thought sport's been in my life for a long time. I'm a proud Kerry woman. And so no question of my credentials in terms of football. My great-grandfather was the first captain of a Kerry team to ever win an All-Ireland. Wow. So those photographs are in the house. Grand-uncles had 3 All-Ireland medals and all that kind of good stuff. And then on my dad's side, he played rugby for London Irish. So, the credentials and the background was all there. But as I say, I never played. But I remember being in school in Moriarty in Tralee, and John Dowling, who was a very famous footballer, 1955 team, played for Kerry. He had a lot of girls. And so he put his energy into coaching the women's basketball team in my school. And that's my first time having that experience of purpose that sport brings into your life. And I remember feeling, I want a piece of that. I like that. So there was very clear leadership, very clear understanding of what wanted to be achieved. And this tiny little school in Kerry, won European championships and did amazing things in basketball. And I really think that might have been the little kernel that sort of started to grow inside me. But it took a few years after that to get me going in terms of my own career.
Yeah, but even from being in that school, I remember as a young boy, a very similar story. I remember when I was 10, I remember Cork won the All-Ireland in football and hurling in the same year. I think it was 89. And I remember they came to the school. And I vividly remember these giant human beings coming with the trophy. And the trophy was an enormous trophy. But for me, age 11, this was the greatest thing I've ever seen. And I vividly remember being able to hold both of them at the same time, thinking this is just an absolute dream for any kid to have that experience. And I'm assuming from a small school in Kerry to go and win European championships, the town must have been, the pride must have been insane.
It was, but what I distinctly remember is at the time being quite curious about it. Like, women's sport wasn't a thing then. Yep. And John Dowling was this incredibly strong, powerful man. And he treated his girls in the team, his own daughters and the team, just the same as he'd treat boys. He was tough as all get out. And I remember being really fascinated by that because I'd never experienced that before. And yeah, they did amazing things. And that pride, you know, as I say, we weren't like this, you know, amazing private school that would be expected to do all of those things. We were just a small school. But yeah, I think that really kind of set me off.
And also from a lot of people, when we're speaking about those questions, they talk about their family, and you've mentioned there about your great grandfather and also relatives that you had playing around in Kerry.
No.
And would there be a memory from your own perspective of understanding where your family stood in the history of Kerry because of that, or was it more a case of, oh, that's what my family did, and I'm doing something else?
No, I would feel very connected to that. Like, and the little stories, like I remember being told about my grandmother knitting the jerseys for my great grandfather and his identical twin, who also played in the team, and like packing them off on the train to go to the finals, because that match was played 3 times against Kildare, packing them off with a bottle of milk and a packet of sandwiches. You know, the very real stuff. And I often wonder, like, what was it like? What was it like in their heads, sitting at home in the sitting room, heading off that morning to walk up to the station to go and play in that match? And probably took them 4 or 5 hours to get to Tipperary to play, and you know, all that kind of stuff. I feel really connected to it.
Yeah, I find that fascinating as well when you look back at the history of sport, as to like what you now see, where players are staying in hotels the night before and they've had their nutritionists and they've had their individual sessions everywhere, and there's not a muscle that hasn't been massaged or whatever. While back then, a lot of people would have gone to work in the morning, whether that may be whatever that job is. They might have had 2 training sessions in the week if they could get to, because they've got their own commitments. And then, as you say, a bottle of milk and a couple of ham sandwiches, and you're on the road. And
Jersey, can you imagine running around in September in Tipperary in a knitted jumper to play an All-Ireland final? It's mad.
There's a story. There's a definite Netflix program there. I can guarantee you. There's something.
Yeah.
And then take it from yourself. Then when you said something very interesting at the start, that you didn't play sport, that it wasn't something that you wanted to do, and you also mentioned it was because that girls didn't do it back then. It wasn't seen that much. Do you think if the Maeve Moriarty born in the generation we're currently in, do you think the Maeve Moriarty would have been more inclined to play sport, or was it something that you just weren't necessarily into?
Oh, 100%. I think if I was probably 5 now and growing into the era of sport that's coming for girls, 100% I would have been in there, because I think the way girls approach sport isn't just about the physicality. It's around the socialization around sport and minding girls within the sport in a team environment, so they don't feel like they're standing out. They don't get criticized. You know, that there's a different way of managing coaching with girls. And I think I would have responded very well to that. But when I was 14 or 15, the last thing I wanted to do was make a mistake and to stand out. And so I just took myself out of the equation.
Very interesting you say that, because my sister, who I guarantee you will be watching this, my sister had no interest in sport. I believed growing up that sport was my domain, that it was the boys' domain, and he'll go off and play a sport and I'll be good at something else. And now my sister is the biggest Clare hurling supporter you could ever think of. She goes to under 16s games with her son. My nephew is very, very talented at hurling, but all of them are, to be fair. And one particular one is very, very talented. And she'd be going with him to like Cavan and Waterford. And she wouldn't even bat an eyelid, while before you wouldn't have got her to a game at all. So I think she would have had the exact same conversation that I'm having with you. I'd say I'd had the exact same one with my sister and a lot of other girls around the country, because you make a really interesting point around the importance that girls have around the social side and the versus the kind of bloke side, which I know we spoke about this previously, but the blokes, I would have been, my attitude going to training is I want to score the goal, or I want to score the try, or I want to score the point, or whatever. While my sister may have been a completely different one. Can you explain that a little bit more as to what your thinking on that would be?
Well, you know, the research is telling us, and it's at very early stages, is that girls and boys socialize differently. And that's just the reality of it. And if you ask any coaches, exactly that, you know, you get a 13 or 14-year-old boy and girl come to training, say for football, the boys will be straight over practicing their kicking and trying to, as you say, score goals. The girls will want 5 or 10 minutes to just talk, to chat, to connect in, to find their level within the group and to socialize, and then go and kick goals and achieve. They just go about it a different way. And that's just recognizing that men and women, boys and girls are different. And And, you know, I think that's wonderful that we're starting to see that. And it's not to sort of say, you know, girls can't and boys can. It's just that it's different. And if we recognize that and give kids what they need at a time when they're really possibly quite vulnerable, then the impact of that is huge across their life, you know, in terms of structure, leading, learning, being part of a team. You know, you'd want every girl to have that opportunity if they could, in a safe way.
Yeah, I think that's also really interesting, because I live in Sweden now, and what I find fascinating about the Swedish culture is that now when people say we're going to go to watch a game, it's no longer I'm going to go watch a men's game. It's you're going to watch a game. You get in the car, you drive to the stadium or wherever the game is on, and only when you actually sit down and have a drink in your hand, you realize it's men or women. I think that's real equality for me. That's real understanding of the skills of both games, both participants. It doesn't really matter what it is. And I think, as you said rightly, that's working okay in Scandinavia, but everywhere around the world also needs to bring some of those experience where the kids don't feel vulnerable at that 13, 14, 15, 16
That's
age.
it. Like my daughter is 15 and a half, and her dad is like 6'6", 6'7". So she's really tall. She's good hand-eye coordination, but she just would not get into sport because she felt too kind of, I'm too tall, or I stand out, or I don't want to make a mistake. And it breaks my heart because I think it'd be wonderful for her, but that's the reality of it. So we've a way to go, but we're getting there, which is the main thing.
Exactly. Before we get into that kind of side of things and talking about the Australia, New Zealand move into Europe, yourself professionally getting into sport then, was it something that you had found yourself kind of falling into, or was it something you would like when you were growing up going, I'd love to actually get involved in this?
I literally crashed into it, Anthony. So I was a child of the 80s. So I'm 54. I started working in 1987. So that'll tell you where I was at. So at that time, it was get a job, get any job, hang on to the job. And if it's a safe job, even better. Yeah. So my first job was with Bank of Ireland, with their life insurance company that they were setting up. And like there was Novena said, you know, this is great. Fantastic. But I learned my skills there, but it wasn't for me. And I knew it wasn't for me. There was somewhere else to go. And as life would have it, those decisions were taken out of my hands. So I was coming home from a gig one night in Dublin, and a drunk driver drove into the cab that I was in. I was thrown out the side window, pretty messed up, spraying my back, cut my head, all that kind of good stuff. But what it forced me to do was stop and take a good, long, hard look at things. And I thought, I've got to chuck the cards in the air and see where they land. So by 6 months later, I booked a flight to Australia. Didn't know a sinner there. Just said, right, I'm off. Packed a bag, 1994, and off I went. And I went looking for work, as you do, and I got lost going to the job interview. This is bad. I stopped a guy in the street and I said, I'm looking for this address. I need to go for an interview for a job, and I think I'm running late. Between the jigs and the reels, he said, look, you're never going to make it to that interview. There's no way you're going to get there. You're in North Sydney. Your interview is in Sydney, the city. I was like, oh, Jesus. What kind of work do you do? And I said, oh, I work in marketing. And he said, right. He said, come with me. And he went into the reception of where he worked, rang his mate, who turned out to be Mark Ella, who was one of Australia's
brothers,
Aboriginal footballers, the three brothers, Ella. And he was the marketing manager at the Australian Rugby Union at the time. And he was looking for a marketing assistant. And I was shunted up the road to do an interview with Mark, which I did. And I got the job. And I started working for the Australian Rugby Union on their 1995 World Cup campaign the following day.
Wow. That is brilliant.
It was mad.
A fantastic story. And it's, you know what I'm saying, it's almost so Irish. As in, it's like, we just you stopped a random bloke who ended up being Mark Ella's mate, who ended up giving you a job within the Australian Rugby. That is as Irish as you're going to get in a nice way.
You know, it is. But also, Anthony, I think there is something in that about jumping off a cliff and saying, you know what, I'm going to throw myself out there and I'm going to see what happens. Not in terms of stopping him in the street necessarily, but just going to Australia in the first place. I had no intentions of working in sport. I just wanted to have a different experience. But by taking those chances in life, I think it just opens doors that you never expected to open. And yeah, and that started me off. I started working, I saw the way sport was run back then in 1995, and it was unbelievable, purpose-driven, clear, probably a bit arrogant at the time, because they were calling their campaign Mission Repeat, because they'd won the World Cup in 1991. So they just assumed they were going to go to South Africa and pick up the cup, not factoring in, you know, Nelson Mandela, Jonah Lomu, the English team, etc. So they got knocked out in the quarterfinals, but that was it. I was on the train from there on in.
And you said as well, very similar that Billy Holland, when he was doing an interview to me, said, which was that sports people are actually the great people to work in your company, because they have a purpose-driven, they're focused, they've been given a task and they understand why they're given a task, they question the task, and once they agree on the task, they go forward. And rather than being a sports person as this person that we can help put in a marketing team and grow, Billy was saying, and it's something very similar to you sound like you're saying as well, that these people have real value to any organization because they are purpose driven, because they're, since the age of 16, 17, 18, whatever age they may have picked up their sport, that they've been task driven and goal orientated the whole way through. Would you agree with that thought process?
I would completely agree with that. And I would also point out the converse of that for people coming out of sport and going into industry. Be careful the industries you go into, that they are equally as purpose-driven as you have wanted to be or have been in your career in sport. So the converse is true too. But I worked for an amazing administrator in sport called John O'Neill, who, as it turns out, his family hailed from Kerry back in 1840 something. And he was the CEO of Australian Rugby from 1998 to 2003. And then I moved with him into Australian soccer when we finished the World Cup in 2003, and we went and took over Australian soccer. And he was the most purpose-driven man I've ever worked for. He was amazing. And he would set 3 goals for a year to an 18-month period. And that was it. Him, us, the team, everyone, that was our focus. And you put your head down and you got on with it. And it was brilliant, and we achieved great things working like that.
Yeah, on that kind of thought process around your 3 goals, and I must admit I love that, because it crystallized everyone's thought process, and everyone in the organization is heading towards the same goal rather than having silos in every part of the organization. From that experience, was there anything commercial or activation wise or commercially wise that you sat there and looking back and went, that didn't cost a lot of money, but my God, that was really, really smart and really did what we wanted it to do? Was there anything that stood out to you?
I think the thing that stood out to me, I wouldn't judge it by money, but I would judge it by intent. So when we were looking to qualify for this is the Australian soccer it's now called Football Australia. We had set a goal to qualify for the World Cup in 2006. Australia hadn't qualified in, 35 years. The company was, or the sports organization had been bankrupt 2 years before. So the thoughts of qualifying for a World Cup was so far away from what we were trying to achieve. But we were playing Uruguay for a half place. So Uruguay, South America, we're in Australia. We had to go to Uruguay and play a game and then fly back, turn around in 2 days and play them back in Australia. And it's like, an 18-hour flight. Mm-hmm. And you're not in direct flight lines. And we worked with Qantas, who was the national team sponsor at the time. And we said, we need to build a plan around making sure that we as a team have every centimeter of advantage to make sure that we get our boys to Uruguay and out of Uruguay and back to Australia as quickly as we can in the best way that we can, so that they're fighting fit when they land. And Qantas absolutely got it. We set up a project team. We worked together. It wasn't like the sponsorship, organization over here and the FA over here. We all worked together. We had the national team coach, Gus Hiddink, involved. We had the doctors involved. We made sure we got a charter flight from Qantas. We stripped down the plane. We got the lighting right so that we were on Uruguay time flying out of Australia and on Australian time flying back in. The guys literally, they came off the pitch in Uruguay. They showered, they got on the plane. They did their physio on the plane. They did their warm downs on the plane. every minute that we could get to have an advantage to land on Australian soil before Uruguay, the Uruguayan team, we took. Even down to the island that we stopped on the way back from Uruguay in the Pacific. There was a little coffee shop run there by a Dutch guy who knew that Gus Hiddink and the team were coming in, and obviously Gus is Dutch. He was there with cigars and coffee and chats, and the guys walked around, got off the plane, back on the plane, back in. We got into Australia, I think something like 3.5, 4 hours before the Uruguayan team. And they're micro things, but they're not, because all of that builds up to your competitive advantage. And I would say to this day, anybody in Qantas who was involved in that whole project would say it was one of the proudest times, one of the best things they ever did. And guess what? We won that match that night in Stadium Australia with 85,000 people, with a penalty shootout that is still part of the folklore of Australian soccer. So I would say sponsors working together with the sport to create a movement. That's where the gold is. That's where the really special stuff is. So that's the one I would talk about.
Yeah, what's brilliant about that is that allows that Dutch guy on that island to say, I was part of the reason we won the penalty shootout, because had I not given them the coffee at that time, they may have been fall asleep. Who knows? And especially because it was a penalty shootout where the margins are so minimal and so little. Like, there's such a one kick there, one kick here. That's how close it is. That it could very well have been those issues. And I think that's a fantastic example for any sponsor when they're looking at activation with any club or federation, that they think about how to, not even necessarily that everyone sees it, but how their staff feels around their link and connection to the team as well. Because I'm sure the guys who flew the plane, or I'm sure the people who stripped out the plane, understood the importance and understood what it meant to them as well.
We all did. We all felt part of them. And it's a friend of mine runs an agency in London called Alfred London, and he did a paper last year on the idea of movements, not moments. So okay, we all get that the TVC has to be done, and, great ads are great ads, and we get that. But as a sponsor, you have to consider, can you create a movement? Can you connect with the movement that is your sport? How do you get into the hearts and minds of people that are the constituents of your sport and help them and bring value to them and create those amazing moments? And, Qantas could do it because they had the plane, and guess what? We needed it because we didn't have the plane. And so all together, you had this amazing outcome.
And it's fantastic, because I would see a lot of parallel in example of what you've given, but a lot of parallel where you speak about movements where the Irish women's team went down to Australia in the soccer, and how Sky bought into that, and how the whole way that was handled with the girls. I've spoken about it a few times on this podcast. I love the fact that when they were announcing the squad, you had this one girl, young kid, 12 or 13, kicking the ball against the wall, but she was pretending to be Taylor, she was pretending to be Brosnan, she was naming out all the players rather than like saying she was Messi or Ronaldo, or she was using it, because that's a movement. Because everyone knew that Irish team going down to Australia weren't necessarily going to win the World Cup. That wasn't their goal. Their goal was to represent Ireland in a major tournament for the first time and be the trailblazers for all other girls who are sitting behind them. And the same goes whether it's rugby or hockey, or doesn't matter what the sport, because I think the women's teams see their value more than they would have done previously, and now understand the importance of that 37,000 people in the Aviva last weekend for the Ireland soccer team.
Yeah,
it's a massively important part. Going on to what you were saying about the importance of girls' sport, like participation, and also tapping into your own history around the 13, 14-year-old mark, where you felt it was difficult to get involved in sport. You're now involved with what I believe is to one of the most coolest things I've seen when it comes to promotion and marketing, and when it comes to not promotion and marketing, but just development of sport and the future of sport. So I made a mistake when I first did this podcast by saying the future of sport is women. And then I watched an amazing woman based out of New York, the New York Devils. I'm not going to butcher her name. I'll put it up on the chat later on, where she did a TED talk where she spoke saying the women's sport isn't the future. The women's sport is now. It's the present. And that people need to realize that we're here and we're not going anywhere. We're not going to talk about the future. We're talking about right now, today. And she's the second in command of the New York Devils. Fascinatingly brilliant woman. It's a TED Talk I will include at the bottom of this.
Yeah, do. I'd be interested to have a look.
Fantastic. But what I would say to you is, explain to me, you're involved with Coachmate. So explain to me what the basis of Coachmate was, where it came from, and what the kind of thought process around Coachmate is.
So Coachmate, again, very strong sort of female angle to it, but Coachmate was founded by Michelle Walsh and Lee Kenyon. So Michelle is the CEO of a very successful business in New Zealand called Augusto. They do all of the creative work, a lot of video work for, not all of it, a lot of the video work for the All Blacks, Adidas, etc., etc. Very, very successful business in its own right. She's a mum of 4, and her kids are all sort of young teenagers. And she is the mum that is driving to, as you can imagine, in New Zealand, just as much as in Kerry, they have hockey and football and soccer and rugby. And so she spent her time in the car. And then Lee Kenyon is, who is her co-founder, is a soccer coach, football coach. And she was basically going, how can I make this experience driving around in the car with my kids? I'm a volunteer coach. How can I get this experience to be better for me? Because at the minute I'm going home trying to download PDFs on how to run a coaching session. I'm in the car trying to Google where my training session is. I've got the kids in the back talking to me at a mile and, really fast about where to be and what to do and what to bring and who's going and who, et cetera, et cetera. So then she met Lee, who had an idea for an app that would basically take all of the great content that national sporting organizations write and produce with like a ton of knowledge behind it. But a lot of it is sitting on PDFs on a website that your volunteer coaches have to download, they have to read, they have to digest, then they have to plan and think. And these are people who are working 9 to 5, that coaching is something they really want to do to probably help their own kids. And it just becomes it can be difficult. And so Michelle and Lee got together and they've created this app called Coachmate. Now it's not downloadable in Europe yet, but they've had incredible success in Australia and New Zealand with it. So everything sits in one app. So if you're going to a training session say you're going to a training session with 6 kids, 3 boys, 3 girls, it's a half-hour session, it's on at 5 o'clock, you've got this app on your phone, you've got all the information in there, you sort of say, what kind of a training session should I be looking at? How am I going to run it? How am I going to structure it? You're going to get 2 or 3 minutes of video pop up that will tell you how to run things, how to structure it, and all the support material that you might need for that. There's also connectivity with the rest of the team, so you can chat as a small group within the app you can share your plans, your training sessions. It's a closed environment that connects not only you as volunteer coaches and players, but also it connects you with the national sporting organization who's able to push the information down the line. And that, I believe, is the bit that's been missing for everyone up until now, be it sponsors trying to reach grassroots, be it, high-level national coaching directors trying to reach down into grassroots, whether it's trying to identify talent up and down the line, selling products that kids and families might want to help them to get to training. There's so much in it. And so this little ecosystem, Coachmate, I believe is amazing. So I've taken it. I was approached by Coachmate in New Zealand to bring it up here to Europe and see where we get to introduce it to people up here.
Yeah, what I love about it as well is that it takes down barriers. Takes down barriers for kids, as we spoke about at the very start of this conversation. Takes down barriers of kids as to what they're going to do, because when you say a session of 30 minutes, that session of 30 minutes, I'm assuming, would potentially be different for boys than it would be for girls. Yes. And it would allow you then to, going back to the very start of our conversation, give those couple of minutes at the start for girls if that's what they want, or if the boys wanted a couple of minutes of skill session at the very start, that's what you can allow them to do. I'm assuming that's the thought process around it as well.
100%. And also, we'd be very cognizant of kids that might have different abilities.
Yep.
You know, so we have a lot of knowledge around para sports and how to help kids with disabilities to be and also coaching the coach how to manage a team of a mixed team, boys and girls. So the different dynamics that are in that, how to manage a team with somebody with special needs, how to integrate. You know, there's a lot to coaching a team, not just the actual session itself. So all of that sits as resources within CoachMate. And the whole objective is to keep kids in sport because it's good for them.
Yeah, I think that for me personally, everyone that knows me and knows my story now, I've got a young son who has got a disability. And for me, when I was speaking to you about this previously, when we were just talking about it, what I found amazing is that point where it's like you want to keep people in sport. And a lot of sports federations, and their goal is to get a player through the system so that player represents the federation. And I understand that makes total sense. I also understand that a lot of responsibility on schools to get them playing, and the clubs that have under pressure just to get results, I suppose, is a mixture. What this seems lovely is it just allows a parent, and I think anyone that is listening to this will know the parent who isn't into sport but is like dragged along by their kids because there's nobody else to train the team, and they haven't a clue about what this is. And if I'm right in saying, from what we spoke about, CoachMate in essence makes them look an expert in front of their kids, and who doesn't want to look like an expert in front of their kids? So 100%. That's what it gives you.
And also, you know, little hints and tips like the drive home from training is one of the most crucial times for a kid in terms of their confidence. So, you know, you're in the car with a bunch of kids and you're going home with them. It's important the language that you use. Talk about, oh, you know, I really watched it today. You had a great game. Or so it's not about the scoring. It's not about the passing. It's about making sure that, like, we as a company would identify that 15, 20 minutes in the car, that's crucial. And here are some things that you might choose to say to your kids to make them feel great about their training. So there's a lot of stuff like that we would feel is really important. So, and that goes back to your point that this isn't always about creating superstars. It's about making sure that volunteer coaches and their kids get all the benefits of being involved with sport. That's it.
I think that's the essence of what sport is. I think I've learned that myself. I've gone from one of those obsessive fans who we must win every single game and every single moment to now looking at it in a different way. And you mentioned about creating movements, and I would say also about creating moments, and that those moments don't necessarily have to be a sponsorable one. I look at scenarios where, as I said earlier, Munster Rugby won a URC after 12 years of not winning it, and I was in Gothenburg, and I was thinking of the people who are behind the scenes that nobody knows their name. Yeah. You might because you work with them, but you know who I'm talking about. People who worked in the ticket office, or the kit man, or people who worked in the in the commercial side of the team. And I've been there for a long time. It's their moments that I really, really remember. And I think then when you look at something like CoachMate, it allows you to have moments for your kids. So again, it allows your kids to feel that they're not just part of something. Also, from your kids, if their father or mother is training the team, that they've actually got a structure that's connected in, that it's not like, oh my God, dad's training today, he's going to do something and the kids are going to laugh at me because dad is such a bad coach. Now it's like, oh my God, dad knows his stuff, and Becky thinks dad is brilliant because dad knows his stuff, and Becky's really important to me. And I think all those add-ons are important for, as you said, the confidence of a kid.
It's interesting you say that, because Lee, who is like the sports genius within the organization in CoachMate, he talks about how he had a really good coach when he was 7 or 8, and he got him excited about sport. Now, Lee went on and played for New Zealand and went all the way up the line. But he said now he plays in his, you know, over 35s team. All of the mums and dads that coached then or were involved, they're all still friends. And all of his mates that he played football with at that 7 or 8 age, they're all still friends. And he talks a lot about that friendship bond that goes through the family and up the line. And I just think that's the power, that's the real power in sport. And I think you could see that a bit on the weekend at the rugby match, where you saw, you know, with Ireland and South Africa, the Irish team so connected to their families, so connected to the fans, all about making memories that go with you throughout your life. And yeah, that's what sport's given me for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a fascinating conversation about what that looks like. And I think sport, is no longer just, as you said earlier, it's no longer about the best player on the field progressing and everyone else having to get up to that standard. It's now seeing a lot more to it and the social element to it, especially after a pandemic, and everyone's understanding the importance of sport for everybody. And I think that's a vital area of it. I could talk about this with you for days. I really could, but I'm sure people who are on their commute across wherever they're listening to this, me would probably be going, Anthony, I'm going to work soon. I need to move on. I'm moving on to my last topic, right? Okay. My last topic is my quick question flight showing. Don't worry, there's nothing in here that's massively bad. If there is, just say, I don't know, and move on. Okay. But these are really quickly and very simple. Right. Okay. Just to get to know who you are. Okay. Tea or coffee?
Coffee.
Netflix or the cinema?
Cinema.
What's the last thing you saw in the cinema?
Oh my God, that's a really good question.
Or what's the best thing you saw in the cinema? Whichever one you want to pick.
Oh God, Gladiator.
Love it.
There's a movie to watch in the cinema. Holy God.
The greatest sport atmosphere you've ever been in?
Oh, the 2005 Australia's qualifying game against Uruguay, because every single person in that stadium felt that they were part of bringing the team their victory. It was incredible.
I'm probably going to say the same answer. Maybe favorite ever stadium?
Oh my God, I was lucky enough to go to the old Thomond Park, back in the day. I was invited by Bank of Ireland to a lunch hosted by Richard Harris, and I went to Munster play, and they won, and it was the most uncomfortable seat I've ever had in my life. I got absolutely drenched, but I will never ever forget it. It was incredible.
It's like people look at the Aviva Stadium now and they forget that Lansdowne Road used to have a dart that used to go underneath the stand. Whenever the dart used to go underneath, which the whole stand would shake like an earthquake.
I've got to tell you a little story. I worked for Irish Permanent back in the day as their sponsorship manager when they sponsored the Irish rugby team. And it was the old Lansdowne Road. And I remember the morning of a match, there was a little building on the side of the pitch that we used to get as part of our sponsorship deal. And you'd go in, and it was falling down, but you'd go in, you'd decorate it, and you were literally on the try line with pints and food and whatever. But I had to go in that morning to bring a box of wine or something in. And I was given the key of Lansdowne Road's front gate, and I opened the front gate and I drove in my little golf, and I drove down the side of the pitch, and I put the box in, and then I reversed back up and out.
That's old school now. I can hear John. I can hear John Cantwell in my head at Thomond Park going, "My God, who gave someone the key?"
The key. Yeah.
The best takeaway restaurant, the best takeaway food, your favorite one.
Oh, Japanese. Love Japanese.
Oh, great call, by the way. Other people who haven't said Japanese yet, that's a great call. Teriyaki and loads of what else. They do dumplings are insane. Yeah, I'm on with you. I'm totally.
Wabi Sabi in Cork. That's where you
yes, just at the bottom of Oliver Plunkett Street.
And then you can get a gelato downstairs, down the road. Fab.
Yeah, I'm all on board. I got to get him to sponsor this vlog series. I totally agree. In Sweden, we have a thing called fika. And fika is where you have coffee and cake at a specific time during the afternoon. And everybody gets involved. So if you're in a workplace, everyone in Sweden knows a fika. Everyone comes along, you have cake. And cake could be anything from a donut to a cream bun to anything. And it's a lovely cup of coffee. And you sit and talk to people. So which one? Fika or go to the pub?
Oh, fika, absolutely, 100%.
Favorite holiday destination?
Oh, I love the Caribbean. Yeah, I have a friend who played cricket for in the Caribbean, so I spent a bit of time there in Antigua, and it's gorgeous. Wow. Yeah.
Last question, because I asked this to everybody, and I'd be interested to get your take as well. If sport was banned from the world, so we weren't allowed to talk about sport, get involved in sport, but you got a job. You had a job separately to that, nothing to do with sport. You had a job, so you had an income. You were fine. But how would your life be impacted?
Oh my goodness, I wouldn't have those amazing life experiences. I think I would have just trundled along, being safe, and good job in the bank and stayed put. And it's sliding doors. If I wonder. Sport allowed me to see things that I would never have seen and experienced. and it encouraged me not to play safe. Keep going.
That's the definite conversation taken from this. It's really, really important. Maeve, thank you so much for your time. I massively appreciate it. I promised you I was trying to get you out before half an hour, and here we are, 40 minutes, and I promise you I could have still talked for another 15, 20 minutes. I massively appreciate your time here. Thank you so much for getting involved. That was Maeve Moriarty. Now, again, I'm dead serious. I did try to get her out of half an hour because she's a busy woman, but that was a fascinating insight into how you fell into a job, but how you put yourself out there. And it's what she said about taking the risk and going to Australia and putting herself into a situation where she wasn't very comfortable to go and do it. And the luck that comes with that. And people need to remember the opportunities you get from that. But then once you get that opportunity, it's about taking it. And the fact that she's an unbelievably successful person because she took those opportunities is a really thing that I took from that conversation, as well as some of the fantastic stories. I've got a mind of her reversing back up Lansdowne Road, the old Lansdowne Road. I'm sure everybody else that knows Lansdowne Road would know exactly where she drove in and where she drove back from. But also, the one last thing I'd speak about is that coach-made element to it and the importance of that is for the future of sport. I've asked a lot of people about the future of sport and where they see the future of sport. I really recommend people to keep an eye on what Maeve does, and I'll put her details in the YouTube clip at the bottom. But keep an eye on what Coachmate is, because it'll give an opportunity for brands. If you want to talk about commercialization of sport, it will give an opportunity for brands to speak directly to your target audience. But more importantly, it allows them to speak to the target audience in a way that the target audience feels comfortable with. And that's what Coachmate gives you from a brand perspective. However, from a sporting perspective, the most important part of it is it allows mainly girls, but also blokes across the board, whether you've got a disability, whether you're not disability, whether you're old, whether you're young, it gives you that opportunity to stay involved in sport. And everyone knows the science connected to it, that the importance from a community perspective, but also from a personal perspective of staying connected in with sport. And we all want that to be done. And I remember I officially retired from playing soccer at 29, and I wish I had continued playing for as long as I possibly could. Some of my friends would say differently, but I would definitely say that. My music is going to play me out. And just before I hit that, make sure you follow everything that I said on all the social media channels you can find, AM Sports Consultancy or AMSC. Please do. Please follow Maeve as well and see what she's doing over on Coachmate. Again, I'll put all the details at the bottom of this YouTube clip. But until then, thanks very much for your time. See you later.